Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von Beek. I was recently listening to this album, Morning Phase by Beck. This album has been in my head for a number of reasons. Firstly, I was watching a video by the music YouTuber Norman Maslov in which he listed, I think it was 50 great singer-songwriter records, and he named a different Beck album. I believe it was Sea Change. And that video kind of interested me because though many of the singer-songwriters he named were of that sort of golden age from the 60s and 70s when rock kind of gave birth to the singer-songwriter genre, he also named various younger artists, people like Fiona Apple, Cat Power, Bon Iver, and of course Beck. And I found it kind of interesting that, my tastes have not ventured into these more contemporary singer-songwriters. I also vaguely remember that this album won the Grammy for Album of the Year. And I don't know how common that kind of thing is, because I guess I think of Beck kind of as like a B-list celebrity. He doesn't feel like he's ever been the biggest thing in music. He's not someone you would call a pop star. And despite being a music person, I've never really paid attention to the Grammys because I feel like, and I'm not sure how accurate this is, it's focused super hard on super contemporary pop music. And, I don't know how precise this is, but I've noticed with my one of my other hobbies, which is film, that a lot of film buffs do watch the latest movies that come out. And if you're like into high film, you would watch the Oscars, even if you don't love all the choices, even if you think the Oscars pick fake prestigious movies rather than the real great indie movies. Whereas with contemporary music awards, it does feel like it's just geared towards what's most commercial and not necessarily what the music nerds are listening to. But at the same time, I don't know, because clearly I have this blind spot for contemporary music, regardless of whether it's more indie and highbrow or whether it's more popular. And these distinctions are messy. One final thing about Beck, I think one of the reasons it took so long for me to listen to him is I just confused him with Jeff Beck over the year and was like, he's sort of one guy, he's sort of another guy. Don't know if that makes sense to anyone else, but I never quite processed who he was, never took the time to think about it, but I'm glad I got to do that now. So let's talk about my experience listening to Morning Phase. It opens with an instrumental, then we get into a song that's called Morning. It kind of reminded me of George Harrison's song, All Things Must Pass, but without the spiritual component. The song seems to be about things being brought into the light. The music behind it kind of sparkles while mumbled lyrics are kind of grim. The next track, called Hard as a Drum, again works with the theme of being brought into the light. But the singing itself again was a bit muted. Also, I noticed both of the songs so far, they didn't have choruses. In the case of this song, I felt like maybe the music was simulating the feeling of going on a drive. So it can't have a chorus because unless you're driving in a circle, things don't repeat. You pass new sights along the way. The next track is called Say Goodbye. This one does have a chorus, so that's a little different. And in terms of the content in it, it felt like maybe it was going for the opposite of the previous two tracks rather than coming into the light. It sounds like a song about saying goodbye to the day and going to sleep. But then that sparkling sort of bright sunlight sound from the past tracks comes into it as the track moves along. The next song on the album is called Blue Moon. I felt like this was like a modern surf-tinged feeling of the old classic song. And I wondered if it was particularly inspired by the Elvis Presley version of Blue Moon, since like in the Elvis version, this Blue Moon, the one in this song, it just stays blue. It never turns to gold. The singer remains in this sort of position of loneliness, though there's also a kind of mumblecore element to it. So the singing sounds more in a kind of emotional nowhere land than straightforwardly sad. The next song is called Unforgiven. This one again uses imagery of night and day. This time the idea seems to be, don't go into light, but go into the darkness. And when we're together in the darkness, we'll both admit bad things about ourselves. And maybe because we're in this dark space and we're open about everything, we can understand each other. The next song is called Wave. In this one, I feel like Beck literally turns his voice into a wave. And on top of that, it has some cool string sound that kind of gives the vibe of a surreal Eleanor Rigby, albeit without any of the folky elements. The next song is called Don't Let It Go. And like a lot of what's on the album, the lyrics are kind of vague. I describe it as a vague warning. Also, like the previous track, Wave, Most of the normal instruments you'd hear backing up a rock song, i.e. guitar, isn't really emphasized. Instead, what we hear is a combination of strings and backing vocal. And this relationship between singer and instrument creates a different dynamic. You know, when a singer sings above a guitar or piano, he sounds like a character. Whereas when a singer sings just above the strings, it sounds more like he's a narrator, some kind of spirit in the air. The next song on the album is one I found a bit more memorable. It's called Blackbird Chain. So this one was supposedly recorded and written in Nashville, and Beck intended it to be a kind of experimental country song. And because of the specificity of the title, this is one of the few where rather than just hearing it as Beck created an ambiance, I was trying to find a meaning in it. I wanted to figure out what is a blackbird chain. So since this is a song about romantic loyalty, perhaps this blackbird chain is a very idiosyncratic, specific thing of deep importance that only the listener knows about. Like it's a very specific piece of jewelry. And because it is so specific, because it is so important to the target of the song, it represents something they can't imagine losing. And the singer is hoping that his love is just that significant. The next song is called Turn Away. This one, again, feels like a spiritual advice song, maybe a bit less new agey than some of the last ones and more something you'd hear on a medieval adventure. Then we get Country Down. This is a misleading title because this one doesn't sound like country music at all. Again, it brings a kind of a new age indie feel where it's just sort of like meditating and having a very sensory experience, driving through the country and being hit by the light. And then finally, we get Waking Light. This song, like the first one, sings about a morning, though I guess it's the next morning or a different new morning sometime in the future. And it makes me wonder, was the morning at the beginning of the song the dream of waking up? Because in this one, he sings, when the memory leaves you, as if all of the album, it was just sort of like an image that flashed before his eyes. And this final song marks a return to reality. It's also one of the few songs on the album where it feels like Beck really belts with his singing rather than letting the singing melt in the back music. And I don't know, it's kind of cool that the last song in the album is the closest thing to a hit. One thing I criticize in albums sometimes is when they open up with their best song and then they get bored. Here you can clearly see Beck was going for some kind of concept. He's building up to one of his best songs. So overall, I feel like one of the reasons I've not looked more into modern singer-songwriter music is that it does have a different sound than more classic singer-songwriter music. You have more mumbly singing, there's more focus on experimental instrumentation, and some of that comes at the expense of having a nice, direct, punchy song where the person is really singing about something. In the case of this album, Beck really experimented with ambiance. And on the one hand, I think that's really cool that an album like that really played with sound, that had fun in the studio, got to win an Album of the Year Grammy. It shows that there is some concern with artistry in that voting process. At the same time, I don't think Beck is the right musician for me. I didn't quite get out of it what I do get out of listening to those classic singer-songwriters, but I was glad I had the experience, and at very least, I'll keep that image of a blackbird chain in my mind. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.